People have always looked for ways to make life feel less fragile, less uncertain, less temporary. That's where the promise of an afterlife comes in. The idea that when this life ends, another one begins. But not everyone feels the need for that kind of promise. And the reasons why tell us something important about how meaning, purpose, and fulfillment can exist right here without depending on what comes after. The belief in an afterlife is comforting because it seems to soften the finality of death. It suggests that loved ones aren't really gone, that justice will eventually be served, and that all the pain and unfairness of life might somehow be balanced out in another world. But the very need for that comfort reveals something. It shows how deeply uncomfortable we are with endings, how uneasy we are with limits. The truth is, limits are what make life precious. Without them, the things we value wouldn't matter. In the same way, a story with no ending isn't a story, it's an endless stream. When someone doesn't rely on an afterlife promise, it's not because life feels meaningless, it's because life itself feels enough. This isn't about despair or hopelessness. It's about recognizing that the value of life isn't enhanced by stretching it out into eternity. It's about quality, not quantity. The love between people doesn't need to continue in another world to be real. It's real because it existed at all. Because in the small span of time we each have, it made an impact. Psychologists who study meaning in life often find that people gain purpose not from abstract ideas of eternity, but from concrete, lived experiences, from relationships, creativity, learning, and contribution. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, argued that humans find meaning not by chasing pleasure or power, but by engaging with life's challenges and responsibilities. He spoke of saying yes to life in spite of everything. That doesn't require a promise of heaven. It requires presence, courage, and awareness here and now. Think about the way people create legacies, and a parent raising a child, a teacher shaping a student's curiosity, an artist leaving behind their work. These things don't need an afterlife to matter. They ripple forward through time in ways that are more grounded and more real than imagining a cosmic scoreboard. They shape the world that continues after us, not for us, but for others. And that's enough. Sociologists note that the belief in an afterlife is often strongest in societies where people feel powerless over their current conditions. When poverty, injustice, and instability dominate daily life, the hope of a perfect world beyond this one can feel like relief. But in more stable societies where people have the ability to shape their lives directly, the grip of afterlife promises tends to weaken. People focus more on building justice, happiness, and fulfillment here instead of outsourcing it to another plane of existence. That says something powerful. It suggests that the less desperate life feels, the less people need eternal promises. There's also the question of accountability. If people live with the belief that real justice will only happen in the afterlife, it can dull the urgency of confronting injustice now. It allows suffering to be excused as temporary, as if wrongs will be righted later. But when we drop that expectation, we're faced with a sharper responsibility. If fairness and compassion are going to exist, they have to exist here, created by us. That doesn't make morality weaker. It makes it stronger, because it puts the responsibility squarely where it belongs. In human hands, philosophers sometimes point out that death isn't just an end, it's also a frame. It's the frame that gives shape to the picture of life. Without that frame, the picture would never be complete. If we live forever, there would be no urgency, no reason to choose, no drive to create. Mortality sharpens the edges of meaning. It's not a defect to fix. It's the condition that makes meaning possible in the first place. When people say that without an afterlife, life has no purpose, what they're really expressing is fear that purpose has to be handed down from above or guaranteed by something beyond them. But the alternative is liberating. It means we get to decide. Purpose is not assigned. It's made. It's built out of what we care about, the bonds we form, the things we do, the mark we leave. And because it's not handed to us, it's ours in a way that's deeply personal and authentic. Even science, adds to this perspective. When we look at the cosmos, we see stars living and dying, galaxies colliding, life evolving in all its strange and temporary forms. We're part of that. We're not outside it. And there's something profoundly moving in realizing that our brief lives are stitched into the same fabric as everything else. So we don't need to escape it to matter. We matter because we are part of it. There are also hidden costs to the afterlife promise. It can create a mindset where people endure suffering rather than change it, or where they neglect the only life they know they have because they're too focused on the one they hope will follow. Entire generations have accepted injustice or denied themselves joy because they were told this life is just a test. Dropping that idea doesn't make life smaller, it makes it fuller, it removes the delay. It says, if something matters, it matters now, not in some future realm. Children naturally show us this truth. They don't need eternity to laugh, to play, to find wonder in the moment. They don't ask whether joy will continue after death. They live it while it's here. Somewhere along the way, adults often lose that instinct and replace it with longing for permanence. But returning to that childlike way of engaging with the present can be one of the clearest signs of wisdom. When people say that without heaven, life is meaningless, they miss something. Heaven doesn't make life meaningful. Life makes life meaningful. The fact that we are here at all, against staggering odds, is already extraordinary, and meaning doesn't have to be borrowed from eternity. It can be created in the brief stretch of years we each get. The promise of an afterlife is, at its core, a way of avoiding the weight of mortality, but carrying that weight, instead of setting it aside, changes how we live. It makes gratitude sharper. It makes love more urgent. It makes action more pressing. Because if this is all we have, then wasting it, numbing it, or deferring it becomes a tragedy. But filling it with presence, kindness, and creativity becomes the highest form of meaning. In the end, not needing an afterlife promise isn't about denying hope. It's about finding a deeper kind of hope, one that doesn't rely on endless tomorrows, but on the richness of today. A hope rooted in our ability to create, to connect, and to care. A hope that doesn't say someday, but says now. And that perspective changes everything. It's worth asking why so many people feel uneasy at the thought of life ending completely. The unease often comes from the way we've been taught to think of ourselves as something separate from nature, as if our stories should somehow escape the cycle everything else is bound to. But when we see ourselves as part of nature, death stops being an interruption and becomes a continuation. The atoms in our bodies return to the earth. The energy we use flows back into the system. We're not erased, we're transformed. This way of seeing doesn't drain life of meaning. It actually deepens it. It shows that what we do matters not because we're preserved forever, but because our actions ripple outward into the world that continues. The kindness we show, the knowledge we pass on, the changes we make in the lives of others, all of that carries forward in tangible ways. In this sense, we're already part of something larger and lasting, not through a supernatural extension, but through the natural web of cause and effect. There's also something to be said about honesty. Believing in an afterlife can feel comforting, but comfort doesn't make it true. Facing life directly, without protective illusions, might seem harder at first, but it creates a different kind of peace. It's the peace of knowing that the meaning we find is built on reality, not on wishful thinking. That kind of meaning doesn't vanish if beliefs change, because it's rooted in what we actually live and do. Think of the way people respond to art, music, or literature. Doesn't have to last forever to move us. Its beauty lies in its fleetingness. A concert that ends is no less meaningful because it's over. In fact, the ending is part of what gives it power. Life works the same way. Its value is in the fact that it's temporary, unique, unrepeatable. That fragility is what gives it intensity. From a psychological perspective, studies on terror management theory show that people often cling to afterlife beliefs as a way of managing fear of death. But interestingly, those who learn to accept mortality directly without needing eternal reassurance often report higher satisfaction in daily life. They invest more deeply in relationships and creativity, in savoring small experiences. They are less preoccupied with what can't be controlled and more focused on what can. This shift also changes how people approach morality. Instead of doing good for the sake of eternal reward, they do good because they recognize the direct impact of their choices and they see suffering and respond to it, not because of cosmic points, but because of compassion. This makes ethics less about obedience and more about responsibility. And that shift is powerful. In real-world terms, you can see this in movements for human rights, environmental protection, or social justice. These movements are driven not by waiting for another world, but by the refusal to accept that change must wait. They're grounded in the urgency of now. They show what it looks like to live fully without leaning on eternal promises. And here's a subtle point often missed. When people let go of the afterlife promise, it doesn't necessarily mean they stop feeling awe or transcendence. If anything, those feelings often become sharper. Standing under a vast night sky, or holding a newborn child, or experiencing a moment of connection. Those experiences can feel profound precisely because they are finite. The awareness that nothing is guaranteed beyond them makes them glow brighter. So the question isn't really whether we need an afterlife to make life meaningful. The question is whether we can fully embrace the meaning life already offers, whether we can stand in the reality of mortality and still say yes. Yes to love, to creativity, to kindness, to struggle, to joy. Yes to all of it, without needing it to stretch beyond what it is. Some people worry that without an afterlife, grief becomes unbearable. They ask, how can we cope with losing someone if there's no reunion ahead? But grief is already about learning to live with absence. Even for those who believe in heaven, the pain of separation is real. The hope of meeting again doesn't erase that. What actually helps people heal is the love and support of others, the memories they carry, and the ways they choose to honor the one they lost. None of that requires eternity. It requires presence, community, and care. And in a strange way, the finality of death makes those connections even more precious. If every goodbye were temporary, if every loss were just a pause before an endless continuation, would we value those moments in the same way? The fact that we only get a limited time together makes us hold each other closer. It makes us more attentive, more grateful. Philosophers often describe death as a mirror. It forces us to look at what we're doing with our lives right now. Are we living in a way that aligns with our values? Are we spending our time on things that truly matter or letting it slip through the cracks? When you remove the safety net of forever, those questions become urgent, as in that urgency can be clarifying. There's also a hidden freedom in not needing an afterlife. If eternity isn't hanging over us, we don't have to obsess about passing cosmic tests or living up to divine expectations. We can focus on shaping lives that feel authentic and worthwhile on their own terms. That doesn't mean selfishness. It means taking responsibility for crafting meaning directly without outsourcing it to a higher authority. Some of the greatest works of human creativity, art, philosophy, science, were built on the recognition of mortality. Poets have long written about the shortness of life. Scientists push to understand the world because they know their window of discovery is brief. Inventors and builders want to leave something behind that outlasts them. The awareness of death has been one of the strongest engines of progress. Without it, much of what drives us forward would lose its spark. Even when it comes to joy, finiteness shapes the experience. Think of a perfect summer evening. Part of what makes it magical is knowing it won't last. That awareness sharpens the senses. The same is true of life. Knowing that it's limited doesn't drain joy. It heightens it. It pushes us to notice the details, to drink in the moment more deeply, and consider this. The afterlife promise can sometimes backfire. If people believe eternal bliss awaits, this world can feel disposable. Its problems less urgent, its beauty less important. But when this is the only world we have, its value skyrockets. Protecting it, cherishing it, making it just, those things become non-negotiable. This planet, this life, this chance, that's all there is. And that makes it priceless. This perspective also reframes legacy. Legacy isn't about living forever. It's about shaping what continues after you. A teacher might never meet the great-grandchildren of their students, but their influence ripples forward anyway. A scientist might never see all the applications of their discovery, but the impact grows far beyond them. A single act of kindness might alter the course of another person's life in ways invisible to the one who gave it. Eternity isn't necessary for influence to spread. When people let go of eternal guarantees, they often discover a deeper appreciation for the fragile, fleeting beauty of the world. They find wonder in the ordinary. They feel awe not in imagining another realm, but in seeing the vastness of what already exists. That kind of wonder doesn't require faith in more. It requires paying attention to what is. There's also the question of fairness. One of the strongest appeals of an afterlife is the idea that injustices here will be corrected somewhere else, that no matter how cruel or unequal life may seem, balance will be restored in another realm. But what happens when people rely too much on that belief? In many cases, it allows injustice to survive longer than it should. If everyone assumes wrongs will be righted later, fewer people feel the urgency to confront them now. History is full of examples. Systems of inequality, exploitation, and cruelty were often tolerated because people were told not to expect fairness here, only later. But if you remove the afterlife promise, the picture changes. Justice has to happen in the present. Responsibility can't be deferred. The weight of action falls squarely on us. That doesn't make the world more hopeless. It makes it more honest. And it sparks change in a way that waiting never could. When people free themselves from needing eternity, they often discover that morality becomes clearer, not murkier, helping others, protecting the vulnerable, building a fairer society. These aren't boxes to check on a heavenly scorecard. They're expressions of empathy and solidarity right here, where it matters. That doesn't cheapen morality. It strengthens it, because it's rooted in real consequences, not abstract rewards. This perspective also removes a certain fear that can come with eternal thinking, fear of divine judgment, fear of eternal punishment, fear of never living up to impossible standards. Those fears can weigh heavily on people, shaping their choices through anxiety rather than authenticity. But when the focus shifts back to the here and now, those chains loosen. People are free to live lives guided by compassion, curiosity, and integrity instead of fear. There's something deeply human about that freedom. It's not about rejecting mystery or awe. It's about facing them directly, without needing a guaranteed safety net. Life is uncertain, fragile, sometimes unfair, but it's also rich, unpredictable, and full of possibilities. Accepting that mix, the beauty and the difficulty together, makes for a kind of resilience that no promise of eternity can replace. Even in small, everyday ways, this shift shows up. Take gratitude, for example. When you know every moment is unrepeatable, gratitude sharpens. A shared meal, a quiet morning, a laugh with a friend. These things shine brighter when you realize they're finite. When eternity isn't assumed, appreciation becomes more urgent. And then there's courage. Without an afterlife, the risks we take, the struggles we endure, and the sacrifices we make are done without guarantees. That makes them even more powerful. Choosing kindness without expecting eternal reward is a truer form of kindness. Standing up for justice without banking on heavenly compensation is a deeper form of courage. Living fully, knowing it won't last forever, is its own kind of bravery. This isn't a bleak message. It's the opposite. It's about leaning into life as it is, without diluting it with someday. It's about seeing that the brevity of life is not a flaw, but the very thing that gives it intensity. When we no longer need eternity, we discover the richness of now. Think of how much weight falls away when life is no longer treated like a waiting room. If this is not a test, not a trial, not a temporary stage before the real part begins, then this is it. This is the show. That realization changes how people approach their time. It pushes them to be more deliberate, more authentic, less willing to waste years on guilt or empty obligation. It shifts the question from what must I do to pass to what do I want this brief life to mean? That shift can feel unsettling at first, but it also unlocks creativity. When meaning isn't handed down from outside, it becomes something to build. Some people find it through love and family, some through art or discovery, some through service to others. The point isn't that one path is correct. The point is that meaning is flexible, plural, personal, and that flexibility makes life richer, not thinner. There's another interesting consequence of letting go of afterlife thinking. It can change the way people view suffering. When pain is brushed aside as temporary or explained away as part of a divine plan, its weight is often minimized. But when you see this life as the only one we get, suffering becomes more urgent to confront. We take it seriously because there is no later where it will be undone. That doesn't make suffering harder to bear. It makes compassion stronger. This is where human progress comes in. Vaccines, medicine, legal rights, social reforms. None of these advances were made by people who were content to wait for perfection in another world. They were made by those who refused to accept unnecessary suffering as inevitable, by those who knew that change had to happen here or it might never happen at all. That drive to improve life now, not later, is what has carried humanity forward. Even the sciences are shaped by this outlook. If all answers were deferred to an afterlife, curiosity would stall. Instead, recognizing the limits of life has fueled an urgency to understand the world, to explore the cosmos, to decode the fabric of reality. While we have the chance, that hunger to learn is powered by the awareness that time is short. Far from being a weakness, mortality is the engine of discovery. And there's something almost poetic about that. Knowing that we are temporary makes us reach further, dream bigger, and create more boldly. If we thought we had infinite time, maybe we'd delay, maybe we'd drift, but with limits comes focus, and with focus comes meaning. So when people say they can't see how life has purpose without eternity, they're overlooking what's right in front of them. Purpose is not something handed down once and for all. It's something woven into the choices we make, the care we give, the lives we touch. It's fragile, like everything else about life, but fragility doesn't erase meaning. It makes it more real. When we look closely, we see that many of the most meaningful human experiences don't depend on eternity at all. Falling in love, raising a child, building a friendship, creating something new, discovering something true, all of these things are valuable because they happen within time, not outside of it. Their worth isn't diluted by their limits. If anything, their limits intensify their value. Take love, for example. The fact that it won't last forever doesn't make it less real. It makes each moment of it irreplaceable. A kiss, a laugh, a shared memory. These things don't need to echo through eternity to be profound. They matter because they were experienced and because they left a mark on the people involved. That mark doesn't disappear simply because the moment ends. It carries forward in memory and influence in the way it shapes who we become. This idea extends to achievement as well. A scientist may die before their theories are fully tested, but their work can inspire future generations. A writer may pass long before their words reach the people who most need them, yet the words still ripple outward. Eternity isn't the measure of impact. Continuity is, and continuity doesn't require another world. It requires human connection across time. There's also the way mortality deepens gratitude. Knowing that life is fragile makes people notice details they might otherwise overlook. The taste of a meal, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of laughter. If these things were guaranteed forever, they might fade into the background. Instead, they glow because we know they won't last. Mortality doesn't rob us of beauty, it reveals it. The afterlife promise often tries to soften that truth by offering endless versions of everything. But endlessness has a hidden cost. If every joy could be repeated infinitely, would joy still feel sharp? If every experience could be replayed forever, would it still carry weight? Scarcity is what gives moments their intensity, and scarcity is built into the human condition. On a social level, communities that emphasize life here and now often cultivate stronger bonds because they know this is the one chance they have to create connection, justice, and kindness together. The stakes are higher, but so is the reward. A culture grounded in the urgency of now tends to produce more innovation, more compassion, and more effort to make things better, precisely because it doesn't push responsibility into another world. And then there's resilience. Facing mortality without promises forces people to develop inner strength. They learn to sit with uncertainty, to carry loss, to adapt without expecting cosmic compensation. That resilience is a form of wisdom, hard-earned but deeply stabilizing. It allows people to navigate life's chaos without needing the comfort of guarantees. So the absence of an afterlife promise isn't a void, it's an opening. It's an invitation to live more fully, to care more deeply, to act more urgently. It's not less meaning, it's more. There's another angle that often gets overlooked. When people believe in an afterlife, they sometimes treat this life as though it were just preparation. The hardships are explained away as tests, the joys as distractions, the real fulfillment always postponed to some later stage. But that postponement can become a trap. If the best is always somewhere else, you never quite settle into the reality of here. You live waiting instead of living. Without that framework, the focus shifts. This life is no longer rehearsal. It's the main act. Every relationship, every opportunity, every challenge takes on weight because there's no backup round. That urgency can be intimidating, but it's also clarifying. It presses us to invest ourselves in the things that truly matter, rather than drifting through life on autopilot. Consider how this mindset changes parenting. If parents think their children's souls are destined for eternity, they might worry more about securing their place in the next world than about nurturing their actual growth in this one. But when the focus is on life itself, parenting becomes about equipping children to thrive, to think critically, to experience joy, to make choices that shape their futures. That shift produces more grounded, resilient individuals. The same applies to education. When knowledge is pursued for its own sake, not as a step toward eternal reward, curiosity flourishes. Questions are valued because they lead to understanding, not because they check boxes on a spiritual ledger. That freedom to seek truth, wherever it leads, has been one of the most transformative forces in history. And it doesn't require heaven. It requires courage to explore. Even art and creativity take on a different dimension. If someone believes eternity will provide infinite perfection, what urgency is there to create now? But when time is short, the impulse to capture beauty, to leave a mark, to express something fleeting becomes irresistible. That's why so much art carries themes of mortality, sunsets, aging, cycles of nature. Artists have long recognized that the beauty of things lies in their impermanence. On a personal level, letting go of the afterlife promise also dissolves a certain anxiety. No more fear of eternal punishment. No more terror of falling short of impossible standards. Instead, life becomes about growth, not judgment, about experience, not trial. That doesn't mean anything goes. It means choices are guided by their impact on real people in real time, rather than by cosmic bookkeeping. And that shift makes kindness purer. A kindness given for no eternal reward is a kindness rooted in empathy alone. A sacrifice made without hope of heavenly recognition is more deeply human. It reflects not fear or bargain, but genuine concern for others. In that sense, morality becomes less transactional and more authentic when it's lived without an afterlife promise. When you step back, the picture becomes clear. Letting go of eternity doesn't empty life of meaning. It amplifies it because it forces us to see that this brief span we have is all the more precious for its brevity, that the things we love, the people we cherish, the work we do, they matter because they happen here and only here. It's also worth looking at how the absence of an afterlife changes the way people approach time. If you think you have eternity, there's no real pressure to act today. If everything eventually balances out, what's the rush? But when this life is the only one, procrastination takes on a new weight. Wasted time becomes something you can't get back. That realization doesn't have to create panic. It can create focus. It reminds us that every day is already part of the finite total we get, and that makes even small choices meaningful. This perspective can actually increase joy in ordinary routines. Drinking coffee in the morning, watching a child play, walking under trees. These aren't just filler moments between grander events. They are the substance of life itself. When you stop waiting for eternity, you start recognizing the extraordinary hidden inside the ordinary. It also changes how people measure success. If eternity is the backdrop, then success is often framed in terms of earning reward or proving devotion. But when this life is all there is, success becomes about alignment. Did you live in a way that reflects your values? Did you contribute something to the people around you? Did you find joy, connection, growth? That shift moves success away from abstract checklists and closer to lived reality. There's also an interesting social dimension. When communities no longer rely on promises of another world, they tend to invest more in this one. Instead of waiting for paradise, they build hospitals, schools, protections for the vulnerable. Instead of resigning themselves to inequality, they organize, reform, and demand better. This world thinking drives progress because it sees no other option. And let's not ignore the psychological benefits. Research often shows that people who accept mortality directly tend to experience less existential anxiety in the long run. At first, facing death without afterlife promises can be unsettling, but once people integrate that reality, they often report feeling more grounded, more present, less distracted by fear. It's like confronting the thing you're most afraid of and discovering you can live with it after all. That resilience creates a quiet strength that eternity can't provide. In fact, one of the most liberating aspects of letting go of an afterlife is the release of control. No more obsession over invisible scorekeeping, no more anxiety about divine judgment. Instead, the focus is on what you can control. Your choices, your actions, your relationships, your impact. That shift can be profoundly empowering. And in a poetic sense, there's beauty in knowing that we are temporary. Temporary things are delicate, fragile, and irreplaceable. That fragility is not a weakness, it's what makes them shine. A flower blooms and fades, and precisely because it fades, its beauty stirs us. Life is the same. The promise of eternity can sometimes dull that sharpness. It tempts people to look past the fragile beauty of this world in hopes of something greater. But there is nothing greater than the reality of existing at all. Nothing more astonishing than the fact that, for a brief time, consciousness opened its eyes in the universe and saw itself. Another dimension of this perspective is freedom from fear-driven control. Throughout history, the promise of an afterlife has been used not just as comfort but as leverage. Obedience could be demanded with threats of eternal punishment. Loyalty could be secured with promises of eternal bliss. When people no longer need those promises, they become harder to manipulate. Their choices are guided by reason, empathy, and conscience, not by fear of invisible consequences. That independence is both empowering and deeply human. It also reshapes how we think about legacy. Many people feel anxious about being forgotten, about vanishing when their time is up. But being remembered forever isn't what gives life meaning. Most people in history aren't remembered by name, yet their lives mattered. They raised children, built communities, shaped the course of countless others in ways that ripple down to us today. The measure of a life isn't whether it echoes through eternity, but whether it touched the lives around it while it was here. Even small gestures fit into this. A kind word to a stranger, a moment of patience, a piece of encouragement. These may never be written into history, but they can change the trajectory of someone else's day or even their life. Eternity isn't required for those moments to matter. They matter because they're real. And if you think about it, eternity itself can be overwhelming. An endless existence would eventually erode novelty, erode urgency. With no end, what pushes us to create, to strive, to cherish? The very limits of life, the fact that we don't have infinite time, are what press us to live with intensity. Mortality is not a defect to be fixed. It's the frame that gives the picture of life its shape. There's also a humility in this view. Recognizing that we are temporary reminds us we're not the center of the universe. We're part of a vast process, a brief flicker in an immense story that stretches far beyond us. And yet, within that flicker, we can build, love, imagine, and shape. That balance of smallness and significance is profound. From this angle, the absence of an afterlife promise doesn't diminish the human story. It enhances it. It makes every decision weightier, every relationship richer, every act of kindness more urgent. There's no guarantee of later, which means now is everything. That's not despair, and that's clarity, and perhaps that's the most striking thing. The idea that without eternity, life is empty flips the reality upside down because it is precisely mortality, precisely the shortness of life, that makes it precious. Knowing the clock is ticking doesn't erase meaning, it creates it. Look at how this perspective changes the way we see endings. In cultures that lean heavily on afterlife promises, endings are treated as illusions. Death isn't really death, it's a doorway. That softens the blow, but it also blurs the truth. In reality, endings are part of the rhythm of existence. A season ends, a relationship ends, a life ends, and each ending makes room for something else. Pretending endings don't exist doesn't honor life. It sidesteps it. When you accept endings, you start to see them differently, not just as losses, but as frames. The end of a song doesn't erase the song, it completes it. The end of a book doesn't erase the story, it gives the story its shape. Life works the same way. The fact that it ends doesn't negate its value, it defines it. And because of that, gratitude deepens. Every laugh, every embrace, every fleeting joy is recognized for what it is, a gift that won't come again in the same way. If eternity were guaranteed, that gratitude would fade. Why savor this moment if endless ones are waiting? But when you know it's finite, you savor more fully, you pay attention. This perspective can also reshape how we approach regret. Many people carry guilt about mistakes, about paths not taken, about time lost. Belief in an afterlife often promises a kind of cosmic do-over, a second chance to make things right. But without that safety net, regret takes on a different form. It becomes a reminder to act differently now, not someday, not later, but in the time that's left. Regret becomes fuel for change instead of a wound that waits for eternity to heal. Another benefit is honesty. When you don't rely on eternal promises, you're free to admit what you don't know, to embrace uncertainty without forcing answers. That intellectual honesty leads to growth. It opens the door to curiosity, to wonder, to exploration. Belief in an afterlife often claims to provide certainty, but at the cost of shutting down questions. Without that need for certainty, the mystery of life becomes something to explore instead of something to explain away. And that exploration is itself meaningful. People climb mountains not because they expect the mountain to last forever, but because the climb itself matters. People write books, compose music, raise families, build communities, not because they're promised eternity, but because the act of creating and connecting is its own reward. That's what fills life with depth. In the end, needing an afterlife is a way of outsourcing meaning. Letting it go is a way of reclaiming it. Meaning isn't handed down from above. It's built piece by piece in the lives we live. And once you see that, the absence of eternity stops being frightening. It starts being liberating. One of the most surprising outcomes of not relying on an afterlife is how it can transform our sense of wonder. Many assume that awe comes from the supernatural, though that mystery requires the promise of something beyond. But in reality, the natural world provides endless reasons for awe. The birth of a star, the growth of a child, the migration of animals, the strange intelligence of octopuses, the vast patterns hidden in mathematics. All of this exists without any promise of eternity, and yet it fills us with amazement. When people stop looking past the world, they start noticing more within it. Instead of straining for signs of heaven, they look closer at the complexity of earth. The ordinary becomes extraordinary when you see it clearly. The breath moving through your body, the billions of neurons firing in your brain, the fragile ecosystems holding life in balance, all of this is wondrous enough without needing to add more. And that shift in perspective fosters humility, because if this is the only life we get, it's not just our own life that matters, it's everyone's. Every person, every community, every species shares in this brief, fragile existence. That recognition can lead to a stronger sense of solidarity. Compassion stops being about spiritual duty and becomes about shared humanity. In practical terms, this makes us more responsible stewards of the world. If there is no other realm waiting, then this planet is all we have. If there is no guarantee of eternal justice, then justice must be made by us. That urgency is not a burden. It's a call. It makes us realize that what we build here is the only paradise we'll ever know. This way of thinking also reshapes ambition. Instead of striving for eternal perfection, ambition becomes about leaving things better than we found them. A garden planted, a child encouraged, a community strengthened. These are not small victories. They are the very essence of a meaningful life. Even our understanding of love changes. Love doesn't need to be endless to be profound. It only needs to be real. And in its finiteness, it becomes all the more intense. The knowledge that time is short makes affection warmer, forgiveness quicker, appreciation deeper. Eternity might promise endless love, but endlessness can make love lazy. Finite love, by contrast, burns bright because it knows it won't last forever. And perhaps this is the hidden strength of living without the afterlife promise. It doesn't reduce life, it sharpens it. It turns our gaze away from someday and pulls it back to today. It insists that if something matters, it has to matter now. There's also the question of identity. Many religious frameworks tie a person's ultimate worth to what happens after death. A life is judged not by what it was, but by whether it qualifies for eternity. That can create a strange disconnection. It reduces the complexity of a human being into a pass-fail system, as though all the love, creativity, struggle, and growth of a person's life are secondary to a single outcome. Without the afterlife lens, that distortion disappears. People are valued for who they are, not for where they're going. Worth becomes intrinsic, not conditional. A child isn't precious because of their eternal soul. They're precious because they exist here and now. A friend isn't meaningful because you'll meet them again in another world. They're meaningful because of the connection you share today. This outlook also reduces a subtle but common form of complacency. If people assume eternity will smooth out every rough edge, it's easier to tolerate harm, inequality, and missed chances in the present. But when there is no guarantee of future correction, the urgency to address problems here grows sharper. We can't shrug off suffering with the promise of heaven. If suffering is going to end, it has to end by our efforts. That's not despairing. It's empowering. And history shows what that empowerment looks like. Advances in medicine, campaigns for civil rights, environmental protections, humanitarian efforts, these achievements weren't made by waiting for eternal balance. They were made by people who knew that this world is the only one in which justice can happen. If eternity were the fallback plan, much of that urgency might never have existed. Another dimension is acceptance, as belief in eternity often creates a fear of death that is disguised as comfort. If you're told that your true self will live forever, then death becomes a terrifying test. So, did you believe correctly? Did you behave correctly? Did you meet the conditions? Without that framework, death becomes simpler. It is the natural end of life, not a cosmic trial, but a closing chapter. That acceptance doesn't erase grief, but it can reduce the layers of anxiety that surround it. And in that acceptance comes freedom. Freedom to live without the weight of eternal judgment. Freedom to choose values because they feel true and humane, not because they're tied to reward. Freedom to make peace with the reality that all things end, and that ending doesn't erase the worth of what came before. Seen this way, the absence of an afterlife promise is not emptiness. It's honesty. And honesty is the ground from which deeper meaning grows. There's also the role of imagination. The afterlife is often framed as the ultimate unknown, a space where everything unresolved will be solved. But the truth is, the unknown already surrounds us. We live every day in the midst of mystery. How consciousness arises, how life first began, how the universe came to be, what the far future will look like, these are questions far grander and more real than imagined paradises. When people stop investing all their wonder in the afterlife, they often find it shifts back to the world itself. Curiosity becomes richer because it isn't stifled by pre-written answers. Awe becomes sharper because it's grounded in reality rather than speculation. The real mysteries don't need to be solved with wishful thinking. They can be engaged with, explored, and marveled at directly, and that brings us to creativity. The awareness of mortality has always been one of the strongest sparks of human imagination. We build stories, songs, monuments, philosophies, not because life is endless, but because it isn't. Creation is our way of stretching the moment, of leaving something behind that carries our presence forward. Even if we vanish, our creations ripple outward. Eternity isn't necessary for that impulse. The fleetingness of life is what drives it. This outlook also reshapes ambition. In a world view shaped by eternity, ambition often bends towards securing a future reward. But in a finite world, ambition becomes about impact. How can I use my time well? How can I contribute to something larger than myself? That shift creates goals that are more grounded, more humane. It's less about appeasing the unseen and more about enriching the seen. It also gives new depth to responsibility. When people believe their choices echo into eternity, responsibility can feel abstract and distant. But when the consequences are immediate, affecting this planet, these people, this moment, responsibility becomes clearer. The stakes aren't cosmic, but they are real, and that reality is enough. Even joy changes under this lens. It becomes something to be fully inhabited, not just sampled. There is no eternal guarantee of happiness, so the happiness we do experience takes on sharper edges. It becomes less about permanent bliss and more about fleeting moments of connection, laughter, discovery. And those moments, because they are rare, shine more brightly. Ultimately, what emerges is not a life stripped of meaning, but a life thick with it. A life where every choice, every connection, every experience matters because it won't come again. That kind of meaning doesn't need eternity. It thrives precisely because of its limits. There's something else that becomes clear when you look at life without the afterlife lens. Joy and sorrow are not opposites to be canceled out in eternity. They are partners in shaping a full human experience. The promise of heaven often tries to erase sorrow by imagining a world where it no longer exists. But sorrow is part of what deepens joy. Grief shows us how much love meant. Hardship shows us the value of relief. If every wrong were instantly erased or balanced later, the richness of those contrasts would vanish. This doesn't mean suffering is desirable, far from it. It means that life's depth comes from its range. We know light because of shadow, courage because of fear, growth because of struggle. These things give human existence its texture, and the texture doesn't require eternity. It requires presence. And presence is perhaps the greatest gift of all in this perspective. When people stop waiting for eternal rewards, they turn their attention more fully to what's happening now. A conversation becomes more alive, a walk more grounding, a meal more satisfying. This shift from deferral to immediacy is what many people describe as truly waking up to life. There's also a psychological resilience in this. By letting go of eternity, people often grow more comfortable with uncertainty. They stop needing all the answers to life's mysteries tied up neatly, and instead they live with openness. That openness leads to curiosity, adaptability, even humility. It makes space for wonder instead of closing it off with ready-made explanations. Think, too, of love again. In a framework that depends on eternal continuation, people sometimes say love is meaningful only if it never ends. But that idea misses something. The meaning of love is not in its duration, when it's in its intensity. A relationship that lasts 5 years can be as profound as one that lasts 50. A friendship that shapes you for a season can leave marks that last a lifetime. The promise of forever doesn't make love real. The fact that it happened at all does. And when you see life this way, mortality stops being just an end. It becomes a call to urgency, a reminder not to sleepwalk through your days. If you want to reconcile with someone, do it now. If you want to create something, begin now. If you want to live more fully, don't wait for eternity to hand it to you, because now is all that's promised. That realization can sound heavy, but it can also be profoundly liberating. It means nothing important has to wait. It means you don't need permission to begin. It means the value of life is already present, waiting to be recognized. Another powerful effect of letting go of the afterlife promise is how it reshapes courage. When people act with the belief that eternal safety is guaranteed, risk can feel softened. If there's always a second life waiting, the stakes aren't quite as sharp. But when you know this is your only life, courage takes on a different form. Choosing to act, to sacrifice, to speak truth, to stand up for others. These decisions carry real weight because they're not made with an eternal safety net in mind. They're made with full awareness of risk, and that makes them braver. You see this in history. Some of the most profound human acts of resistance and bravery weren't fueled by the hope of heaven, but by the recognition that injustice had to be confronted here. People who fought for freedom, for equality, for dignity, they acted not because eternity demanded it, but because their conscience did. They knew they might never see the results in their own lifetime, and they acted anyway. That kind of courage doesn't need eternity. It needs conviction, and conviction itself becomes stronger in this light. When morality isn't tied to eternal reward or punishment, it becomes more authentic. Doing the right thing because it's right, not because it's profitable in the cosmic economy, strips morality down to its essence. It becomes about empathy, about justice, about the ripple effect of our choices in the world around us. That kind of morality may look ordinary, but it's actually more profound. There's also a release that comes with this view, the release of trying to solve the unsolvable. The afterlife is often described in ways that can't be tested or proven. Whole systems of belief are built on competing images of eternity, and much energy is spent trying to get those details right. Without that burden, people can redirect their energy toward what's knowable, what's tangible, what's changeable. That focus makes life more grounded, more productive. It also sharpens appreciation for diversity. If there's only one eternal truth that determines everything, then difference can feel threatening. But if meaning is created here and now, then difference is part of the richness of life. Different perspectives, cultures, traditions, these aren't tests of eternal loyalty. They're variations in how humans make sense of their brief time. That recognition can open the door to deeper tolerance and curiosity. Even mortality itself starts to feel less like an enemy and more like a teacher. It teaches us urgency, gratitude, humility, and compassion. It shapes art, philosophy, and culture. Without it, we might never push ourselves to create, to change, to connect. Mortality may be the hardest truth we face, but it's also the one that gives life its depth. And once you see that clearly, the promise of eternity begins to feel less like comfort and more like distraction, because the comfort is already here, in love, in connection, in creation, in presence. In the end, the absence of an afterlife promise doesn't leave us empty. It leaves us free, free to see life for what it is, fragile, brief, and astonishing, free to shape our own meaning without waiting for permission or validation from eternity, free to love more urgently, to act more courageously, to live more fully. If there is no second stage waiting beyond this one, then this life is infinitely more precious. Every laugh, every embrace, every act of kindness is elevated because it will never be repeated in exactly the same way. That's not a loss. That's a gift. It's the gift of knowing that our time matters, that our choices matter, that our presence matters. When we stop leaning on the idea of forever, we start leaning more on each other. And that's where the real strength is. In the bonds we form, in the justice we fight for, in the beauty we create. We don't need eternity to give us meaning. We only need this life, lived fully and honestly, to find it. So why don't we need an afterlife promise? Because life itself is enough. And the fact that it ends doesn't diminish its value. It's what makes it priceless.